Morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with CommuniCloud and our guest speaker from Agile Blue, Tony Petricola. I'd like to give a big thank you for everyone on the call with us today. We really appreciate taking time out of your busy diaries, and we're very excited to have you here. This morning, we do have a pretty packed agenda. We're going to cover some of the key security challenges organizations are facing today and how SOC-as-a-Service can help resolve some of these and give some pretty much well-earned peace of mind to your IT and security teams. Before we do start, I do want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping rules. We will be having a Q&A session at the end with Tony. So if during the session you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A panel at the bottom or to the right of your screen, and we'll get them answered then. If we don't get round to answering them due to time, we will do our best to follow up with you directly afterwards as well. We will be recording this event and sharing it on our social feeds and other channels. If you will, or if you do find that anybody you may want to share this, please feel free to do so. Lastly, if you've got any questions that can result from the end of this, or you want to book in a demo or just even a follow-up session to discuss some of these topics, please let us know and we'll do our best to get you booked in as soon as possible. Without taking any further time, however, I'll pass over to Tony. Tony, welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Well, good morning, everybody. So today we're going to talk, like Stephen mentioned, we have a pretty packed agenda. And the point is to really discuss some of the major security issues that are happening and that you probably are aware of and know and totally understand, but how an autonomous SOC-as-a-Service can help. So we'll look at how we can save time and money, especially as resources become harder. We're going to look at a number of ideas, and these might not be things that everybody just does tomorrow morning, but a number of really good ideas and best practices to help put your cybersecurity practice in the best path forward. And then really taking that SOC-as-a-Service and making it really work for your organization. So let's go ahead and jump in. And again, like Stephen talked about, questions, we're thrilled to answer them. We'll get to them at the end, and we can always follow up where we need to follow up as well. So when you look at the major pillars of a cybersecurity program, look, we all know technology plays a huge part of this, but people and processes are just as critical. And the question you all have to ask yourself, we all do, is do we have alignment with these three pillars? Sometimes we have one or two, but we might not have all three. And that becomes a potential challenge in our cybersecurity strategy. So it's a question that only you can ask and answer yourself. But when you look at maybe one of the biggest pillars that seems to be the consistent one, we tend to understand the technology and at least have access to it. Maybe budgetary reasons keep us from it, but at least we know how to get there. The processes, I think we have a good idea, but the people are expensive and they're elusive. And when you combine them with the technology and the understanding and that expertise, it becomes pretty hard. And you look at the demand and how it's outpacing the current skilled cyber practitioners. I mean, it is growing at a tremendous rate. The costs are driving up. And when you look at the competition globally, and especially, and we're not going to use excuses of COVID, but COVID has taught us one thing, that the world is a lot smaller than we had thought it was, where working from home and not being in offices and not being in specific countries becomes a lot smaller, and people can be anywhere, which has also driven up the cost of really skilled cyber talent. And when you look at McKinsey and the work that they do, even though McKinsey works with larger organizations, if they're positing that skilled workers are outpacing large organizations when it comes to budgets, there's no way small and mid-sized businesses can completely build out a team, and a team that has the total and correct skills they need from a cybersecurity perspective. So that makes it even more elusive for organizations. So as we all look at buzzwords, and we're all tired of buzzwords, and McKinsey and Gartner, and we all use these buzzwords, right? But automation is a key buzzword that you've seen pop up at the end of 2020. Obviously, in 2021, it's probably one of the key buzzwords we hear, but it is a buzzword that actually means something because the more we can automate, it helps us actually get through those three challenges. Automation allows us to remove some of those barriers to people. It allows us to obviously use technology that could be working alongside our people. But more importantly, from a process perspective, it makes us just much more effective. It obviously makes us efficient, but being more effective in cybersecurity is the key to hopefully finding indicators of attack before there's a breach. And that's where we all expect to go. So automation is really the key of what we're trying to build with our cybersecurity strategies. And when you look at SOC as a service, and a pet peeve, I hate when people use acronyms, and I've been using it for the last 5 minutes. So when we look at SOC, we define SOC as a security operations center, which is a 24/7 operation. And we peg it as a service because companies like CommuniCloud and companies like Agile Blue offer this service because we're bringing the technology, the people, the 24/7 service to our clients in an automated fashion to find these indicators again before a compromise happens. So look, no matter what size of business you are, small, mid-size, global, the largest of the global companies, governments, we are all facing four challenges right now, and it's because we're digitizing our businesses, right? No matter which business we're in, there's a digitization to it, and we're all taking steps towards it. Some of us are fully digitized, and some of us are taking baby steps to it. But we're all growing our digital footprint, and a lot of folks are doing it with very little cyber automation. And the more you increase that digital budget, which is good, the percentage going to cyber, and this is according to both Gartner and McKinsey, is actually going down. So we look at these growing digital budgets, but less is in that budget to actually secure the digital technologies you're placing to grow your business. Teams that you do have, whether they're one person, 50 people, whatever, are overloaded with not only lots and lots of data that they probably can't get to, lots of tools. The average mid-sized business can have up to 20 different cybersecurity tools slash vendors. That's vendor sprawl. And when you have that many tools, it's hard to A, be an expert in all of them. And B, it's probably almost impossible to know they're tightly integrated. And you're really getting one screen that kind of tells you everything you need to know. So visibility goes down, risk goes up. And that's something that is just putting a lot of pressure on our teams. And we talked about the decreased visibility, but visibility actually goes down when you think about two factors that just about every company in the world is facing. Number one, a huge challenge with remote workers, right? We went from having one corporate headquarters or 10 or 15 offices globally to literally having thousands and thousands of offices as everybody went to their homes, whether that was by design, whether that was forced by COVID. But I think regardless of that, you're going to see that as a new trend moving forward. So how do we protect more decentralized organizations? Because now we have thousands of offices all over the world that we have to figure out. Further, as more and more companies are moving to the cloud, that presents a huge challenge, right? Not just, people think hackers are hacking into the cloud. Not at all. The majority of hacks we see into the cloud are misconfigurations, are things that we kind of maybe just didn't do the best job ourselves of understanding the best practices on configuration and setups and integration of platforms and applications. And this presents an even bigger challenges and a growing lack of visibility. So you put all these together and the hackers are winning. And you're seeing this every day of the week, unfortunately. You're seeing it on a really large scale, with things like SolarWinds, and you're seeing it on a day-to-day basis when you read in your local business publication that so-and-so was hacked or had ransomware or there's malware or whatever it might be. And it gives us, I think, a moment of pause, and then we get on with our day. We don't sit there and actually look for solutions that give us, I think, a more of a heads up, because that news we become almost desensitized to. Every day of the week, more and more people are being hacked, and unless it's your business or your customers and your data, and I guess at the end of the day, that check that you'll be writing, whether that's restitution to customers or to a government regulator, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. We're doing this, we're doing that, but maybe we're not doing it in a holistic approach that includes everything. And that's something that we all can get better at, every single one of us on this call today. So when you look at that visibility component to it, the majority of companies kind of look like this chart a little bit. And if you're not using IoT or into control systems like, say, manufacturers are, you definitely have an IT infrastructure. And we just talked about remote becoming even more grander across the on-prem infrastructure. But as you move into the cloud, and that could be hybrid cloud, it could be multi-platform, it could be moving into containerized services like Kubernetes. All of these applications are tremendous. It's obviously allowing us to become more resourceful. It's allowing us to do more, but it's presenting more and more challenges to not only secure, but truly understand for every company, small, mid-size, or large, exactly what needs to be secured. So when you look at a security operations center as a service, SOCs have been around for a few years. Larger companies had their own SOCs, and they staffed it with analysts, using things like Splunk and other applications. But as that type of application becomes extraordinarily important, it becomes less practical for small and mid-sized businesses to afford the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, when you think about the 24/7 staff, the applications, the machine learning, all the tools that go into actually running a security operations center. So the as a service model has really started to increase, really started to grow over the last 18 months. And if you look at some of the latest research, especially by IT Group or Gartner, you'll see that SOC is scheduled to grow globally at around a 32% compounded annual growth rate. That means more and more companies are embracing the as a service model and looking to bring in a very trusted partner to say, okay, you're my 24/7 eyes and ears to my security operations center. I don't need to handle that right now. And I can redeploy my resources, my limited resources here at my company, to more innovative projects that digitize my business, maybe increase my revenue or decrease my expenses, or more importantly, allow me to obsess about my customers and create great solutions for them. So a SOC will help solve challenges by being a modern cloud native application, a 24/7 team that complements your IT team. And the number one way that it complements your IT team, aside from being 24/7, is it gives you 100% visibility into everything that you're being monitored, from your network to your devices, to your mobile devices, to applications, and even into the cloud. True visibility across that entire digital infrastructure should be a goal every organization strives for. Also, to have a good understanding of what your risk looks like on a day-to-day basis, right? Using proper instrumentation, which can be driven by risk scoring, allows IT executives to get a really solid understanding of where they are. So if you're in a executive meeting and the CEO picks on you and says, how are we doing from a cybersecurity perspective? I mean, I would think just about any CIO would probably say, we're doing great. We're doing fantastic, right? But if they can quantify that with a number that makes sense, right? Our risk score is X. And here's a couple of the gaps that we have, and we're working on a plan to solve them. That type of visibility back to the executive team goes a long way. And also, if you think about a SOC as a service, it's generally a monthly fee. That's a fixed pricing model that will make the other person at the end of the table, the CFO, extraordinarily happy. So instead of it being a big capital expenditure that they have to write a huge check for, this could be something that's part of your operating expense budget. It's fixed, it's realistic, and it just becomes something that's part of the ongoing IT infrastructure not something that is a huge hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that has to be written, on January 1st every year. So as we continue to think through our cybersecurity challenges, let's talk about some of the top risks that everybody is generally slated to see over the next year and a half. And, you kind of wanted to do a reset after COVID because I think a lot of that data was skewed. Now, these 5 things absolutely apply to it, but I think there's going to be some differences. Number one, ransomware, right? Ransomware is not going anywhere because it's incredibly profitable to the ransomware gangs that are everywhere. It's relatively easy for them because it works, unfortunately. My company, who's a cybersecurity company, a SOC company, people try to do this to us today. They try to use some social engineering to start a ransomware. It was fun to see how they were trying to impersonate us. And of course, we carried it along for a little while to see where it was going to go. But this literally happened today. And I'm not trying to be funny or cute because we have a presentation today. If anybody wants to see the conversation pieces we snip for, you can send me an email. I'll send it to you. It's pretty humorous. But it works. It works across the board. It works globally. And unfortunately, it catches employees. Maybe they're not trying to be malicious, but maybe some negligence, maybe some laziness, maybe just lack of training. And it catches people. 2, when you think about privacy regulations, data collection, data residencies, with the regulations and the governments that are regulating these, no matter which country you might be in, are you in safe harbor? And if you look at these laws and regulations, even though they might be different all over the place, and depending on the industry you're in, there could be some different nuances to them. 24/7 monitoring also helps you stay within a safe harbor that says we are doing our best. We've put every defense out there, and we still were not able to to stay secure from a potential hack. But it shows that you're making these changes. When you look at one of the biggest jumps in 2020 into 2021 was supply chain and vendor management, especially in healthcare. Healthcare started scrambling a lot with telehealth, with billing, with accepting different modes of communication and data sharing because of the world was and still is in many parts of the world in a big crisis. Now, take that outside of healthcare and bring it to any industry. What or who is the weakest link in the supply chain? Number one, it doesn't matter if it's one of your partners. It doesn't matter if it's a critical vendor. It could also be you, the weakest link to one of your critical partners. That is one of the ways where people say, well, we didn't get hacked, but our data was accessed because of a vendor. I got a notification a few days ago on a site that I had used that was compromised, and they said, your credit card information wasn't taken. It was actually I live in the United States, and it was actually I'm gonna confess something. I got a parking ticket, and the organization that did the tickets, it was not a police it was a local parking situation, but they were hacked. And the only thing that they said that the hackers got was my license plate. Well, that means something, right? And they try to soften it with us. So the point was, I didn't get hacked personally, but the folks who I entrusted with my license plate did, and that data is now out there. So as you think about your supply chains and your vendor management, who are you doing business with? Law firms see this a lot. Law firms are dealing with banks, are dealing with the most confidential and critical data of their clients. And law firms are generally put to tests on vendor management and audited to see what their infrastructure from a security perspective looks like. Next, we're going to talk a lot about this on the next slide or two, but cloud migration and misconfigurations. These are our top 5 risks as we see huge growth when you look at AWS from Amazon, Azure from Microsoft, GCP from Google. Maybe you're looking at some other local or regional data center providers for more of a private cloud. Regardless, those migrations, there could be misconfigurations in those setups that really leave you vulnerable. And then we talked a little bit about social engineering. We talked about ransomware. Social engineering is a huge component of how people are easily tricked into wiring funds or giving up email addresses or other critical information. And again, it's a lack of training, and it's more neglect and laziness than it is maliciousness. And it's something that we can all get better at. But to be candid, we don't. When you see trainings, when it comes to social engineering, it's once a year, and your employees pass a test once a year. But what happens 7 months in as they forget some of these things? They're not reminded. The training has not been kept up. And that's when you become vulnerable. So if you do the trainings in January, February, you're probably looking pretty good. But by May or June, it starts becoming a little bit more lax. So when we look at our next discussion, we talk about some of those next generation, but I also put current generation vulnerabilities because if I had to guess, a lot of folks on this call are either in the cloud or migrating to it or in some type of hybrid infrastructures. And when you look at what these next generation events look like, we talked about the third-party data breaches and who is that weakest link. We talk about the external attack surface as well that's going to continue to expand. Think about it from this perspective. Every day of the week, IT folks, business folks have discussions about APIs and, do you have APIs? Do you share your APIs? And here's our APIs. And oh yeah, they're available over here. Well, when you think about those APIs and web services and all those cloud applications, and think about your sales teams and marketing teams that are sharing data with everyone because you're trying to make sales, you're trying to make doing business with your company extraordinarily easy. Tear down all the walls, tear down all the moats to doing business. Make it easy. Well, while we make it easy, this attack surface becomes bigger. It gives IT and your security department more space to have to try to protect. And they might not even have a true understanding of where all these APIs and web services and integrated applications and where all this data might be. These are some of the vulnerabilities that are really going to press on every company over the next couple of years. And then we get into the next one when we look at, we talked about misconfigured, S3 buckets and things like that. But think about this, when people go to this, we hear this all the time, even from very sophisticated companies. Oh, we're in Amazon. We're in AWS. The security's great. We're good. You never hear Amazon getting hacked. No, but Amazon last year had, I think, a pre-tax profit of about $21 billion. The richest man in the world worth $140 billion is CEO, soon to be executive chairman. And that company makes hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue. You're right, they're not getting hacked. But in AWS or Azure or in GCP and any cloud organization, it's a shared responsibility. Those organizations are going to make sure no one's infiltrating the infrastructures, but you're responsible for your applications. You're responsible for your networks, your Active Directory. Anything in the cloud that's yours is your shared responsibility. And you see a lot of folks thinking they're wiping that clean. When you go to the cloud, you bring in an entirely new infrastructure that needs to be secure, and one that becomes harder to secure as well, because there's so much out there and there's so many folks that are banging on those types of infrastructures. And then finally, when we look at some of these next gen vulnerabilities, is password reuse. We see this happening a lot with executives, where they'll use one password, they use things away, and when you look at how these happen, they really put infrastructures in a tremendous vulnerability. So these are things to think about, not things you're going to solve tomorrow. These might not even be eye-opening. They might not even be provocative to you. But the question everybody has to ask themselves is, where do they have vulnerabilities in one, two, or all of these things that we're talking about today? So hopefully this presentation, as we continue to go, just rings a couple bells of things that you need to think about. Hopefully you're thinking about a security operations center as a service as a whole, but all of these components can be monitored by one, but definitely by your providers as well. When you look at how CommuniCloud works with customers, these are all aspects of truly understanding the visibility and the infrastructure configurations of your digital business. So when you think about de-risking in the cloud, we talked about 4 potential vulnerabilities. What are ways to de-risk in the cloud? As we continue to discuss security, it can't just all be about fear and uncertainty. It's got to be about things we can do, right? And we talk about security operation center as a service as one of those things. But number one is, can your organization, your IT team, have true visibility into all your data, have true understanding of where that data lies, where it's located, who has access to it, what are those profiles, and truly understanding all that information? Because it's that visibility that allows us to truly understand where we need to go with our cyber strategy. I think a lot of folks don't have true visibility and think the strategy is covering, and it's actually not. Are you benchmarking how your current cloud security settings stack up against industry best practices? Also, are they aligning with compliance requirements? You know, it's interesting when you look at businesses that are heavily regulated, healthcare, financial services, you know, PCI, if you're in credit cards and online retail, things like that. When you think about those types of compliance requirements, a big question that goes into some of this information is not only understanding compliance from a risk and compliance perspective, but are you aligning the best practices around those requirements? Are you aligning the settings around those requirements? And do you have the instrumentation and reporting around those requirements? These are really important things that I think a lot of folks think, compliance, we got it, and it's over here. Generally, compliance runs a little bit different than IT, and risk and compliance kind of run sometimes in silos. Those need to be very well meshed together, because a lot of the security that we need to understand rests with those compliance requirements. And don't think the IT folks truly understand compliance. It's kind of not their job. They're trying to make digitization and IT run smooth and effectively. They need that counterbalance with risk and compliance. Also, let's talk about enhanced protection around your most critical assets, whatever those assets might be. And of course, data is number one, no matter what organization we're in. But your intellectual property, that personal and financial data, whether that's personal health information, my license plate, you know, if you're publicly traded, your financials, whatever it might be for your organization. A lot of folks will say you can't protect everything to a T. And there's some truth to that. You can do a lot, but the things that matter the most critical, mission critical elements of your organization, whatever industry you're in and whatever company it is for your company, can you enhance protection around those critical items? And I think sometimes folks look at the totality of everything and think, my goodness, how can I protect everything all day, 24/7? And it becomes daunting. And granted, that's something you have to think through. But if you think at a smaller scale, at the most critical, mission critical data first, and then start expanding it, it puts a security strategy in place that becomes realistic to both budgeting and resources. And then all security should be multi-layered, but I think there's a lot of faults in the way security can be set up as well. So developing that multi-layered approach, not only around threat detection, but around response, because something will happen eventually from a cyber perspective. So it's something that needs to be thought through. All right, I know we're getting close in our time, and we want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions, and no one wants to hear me talk all day, that's for sure. You guys are just getting started with your day. So let's talk about some best practices for every business. One, I've said this now 50 times in this presentation, but I do believe it's the most important, and that's visibility. Visibility around all your digital assets and how it is accessed. That's a key component. You can't really start a strategy without understanding that. Two, where's that most important data, encrypted data stored? Who has access to it? That's a second piece of the audit that kind of blows people's minds sometimes. Who has access to it? You think about people since they've been working from home, Dropboxes and Box and SharePoint sites everywhere to share data because people aren't in the office anymore. Okay, that's great, but who has access to all this stuff? And by the way, is someone monitoring it? Is it being monitored to know from a data loss prevention? Is something being sent out, shared, accessed that shouldn't? So it's not just around understanding it, it's around monitoring it. Understanding the behaviors of your devices and humans. Humans might not be malicious, but they could be negligent. And that's where a lot of cyber events can start. Next, a quick identification of anomalous activity. Make no assumptions. When anomalous activity happens, there needs to be alerts because even false positives can turn into something, and false positives can be tweaked down to you have at least 90% confidence in an event. But make no assumptions if you haven't started with anomalous activity and machine learning around that. And again, of course, we're going to say this, but 24/7 monitoring for immediate response in less than 30 minutes doesn't guarantee you're not going to have a cyber event. But what it guarantees is that there is going to be detection quickly, and you and your team and your partners can hop on that very, very quickly to stop or at least mitigate any potential damage or risk. So, as we start wrapping some of this presentation up, going into some Q&A here in the next few minutes, the big ask from small and mid-sized businesses and everybody on this call today is really around a big demand for systems that can automate security, right? Where it's not a function of reducing headcount for the sake of a number. It's taking the headcount you have and maybe the requisitions you have on to add more headcount and move that headcount into more forward-leaning objectives, new projects that are going to make your business more effective and efficient, and leave the security and the specific specialized security to the folks who are, who do it all day, 24/7, and understand how to run a true security operations center. Because the demand for all these things, especially the skilled positions, is so critical right now and so expensive, not everyone can afford it. So as we try to wrap things up a little bit, some of the automation that it should be integrated into a platform. We talked about machine learning and user behavior analytics. Again, it's the activity and behaviors of both devices and people that need to be understood. Integrating those applications. So it's not just your network or servers. I had a discussion today with someone that says, we're monitoring our network and servers. And I said, well, what about workstations? Those are just as vulnerable, if not more. It's all your digital infrastructure because it all goes into a predictive risk score that allows you to totally understand where you have an incident that needs to be responded to. And as we wrap up our last couple of screens, some of the benefits of integrating machine learning into cybersecurity. We talked about its effectiveness, but let's talk about time savings. When we can reduce people, looking at alerts and time, people reviewing reports when reports can be automated, risk scores that go into, because the risk score can be automatically created based on everything being monitored, that breeds an IT department that is not chasing false positives, that is not chasing putting reports together. This is a truly integrated autonomous application that allows attack detection to be done by the machines, behavior analysis to be truly understood, and that analysis to be bubbled up to the top. So all of us in the IT group, all of us from your trusted vendors, know the risk assessment, know the risk, and truly understand the gaps to those vulnerabilities. So no matter if you're monitored 24/7, it's also understanding those vulnerabilities are so you can look at your strategy and holistically harden those vulnerabilities. So moving forward, those are not the weakest link in the supply chain. So I've been talking for about 35 minutes. I think everybody's tired of listening to me at this point. Why don't we, Stephen, you could pick it up
Yeah.
here. Why don't we look for some questions?
No, thank you for that, Tony. That was fantastic. And we'll open it up to a couple of the questions that have come through already today. Lee, can you
Yes.
pass through the first one?
Thanks so much, Stephen and Tony. We've got a couple that have come through. So first question. I'm a small healthcare company with little budget. How can I help my boss understand why we would need this?
It's a great question. And regardless of healthcare or financial services or whatever you might be, you're protecting extremely critical, confidential, embarrassing data, right? That is true data that is critical to someone's livelihood in healthcare. That should be monitored 24/7. It should be monitored in a way that not just pops an alert up because of anomalous behavior, but the systems are geared for healthcare. They know how healthcare is generally attacked. They know what to look for. And those are the keys to also being in compliance with regulations, to know how that data should be monitored and protected. I can also tell you this, when you look at places like healthcare, sometimes healthcare is one of the least to innovate when it comes to technology. Sometimes the budgets are going into really expensive machines, and it should be, right? Because that's actually saving lives. But IT sometimes in healthcare, sometimes doesn't get the budget. Well, with a security operations center as a service and a fixed monthly cost, it's a perfect solution for that, because a big capital expenditure does not need to be written. That's a big deal when it comes to getting something into a budget or not. Hopefully
The
that
other thing on
helps.
there as well, I'll probably add on to that as well, is obviously healthcare has normally a large OT environment as well. So it's not just your IT systems and your data, but it's also all of those systems and tools that you're running. So it could be cameras, it could be sensors, it could be medical equipment, etc. As soon as they're connected, obviously, to a network and they're getting upgrades and all the usual patches, etc., then they're also a target of this environment. So being able to actually see across your OT and your IT landscape gives you greater visibility across it, but also you'll normally find that there's some sort of cost savings on this as well, because a lot of these would have separate systems and separate tools. How do you still then aggregate these all into the one platform to give you the visibility for it as well?
Right. So next question. During my last audit, it came up that I needed to log my firewall service and critical infrastructure. Why wouldn't this be enough?
Steve, I don't know if you want to, I'll jump on that first,
I'll
Steve,
let
and
you
then
take.
you can go. Does that sound? Yeah,
Yep.
I think at the end of the day, it makes a lot of sense. And a lot of folks will also say, even my remote team's coming through VPN, so we are gathering that data. There's a lot of truth to that, and obviously networks and firewalls and all that needs to be monitored. But we talked about it a little bit earlier. As more of our devices become disparate, they're all not being brought through a centralized location. I'll give you a great example. When people are working from home, they're popping on different things with their phones, with their iPads. They might not be their employer given workstations with the proper agents and security on them. Those present huge weaknesses. Also, just because things might be being monitored through a firewall, if you're in the cloud, if you're in a web application, those are huge potential spots that might not be being monitored, that do present that weakest link into a critical data repository. So I think at the end of the day, when we talk about 100% true visibility, that means everything in your network, your devices, and your cloud.
Yeah, I'd also probably add that obviously, yes, you can log all of this information for compliance. People can do it. It's there. It's what you do with that data. So a lot of times people say you have to log it for compliance and retrospectively go back and look at what happened. Now, how do you then take that data and those logs and aggregate it together and then make sense of the thousands and thousands of these log entries that are coming through to catch something there and then as it's happening within that 30 minutes, as Tony mentioned before? That's probably the key part of it. So it's not just how do I retrospectively go back and see what happened? How do I catch it maybe while it's in it and rectify it, but also then build that into my processes to say, okay, how do I stop it from happening again? And then also, how do I then go through and retrospectively fix what's happened in the first place? So that process and procedure, you shouldn't be looking up at the end. And when it actually happens as to what you need to do as a business to rectify it, you should already have that process and plan kind of mapped out already.
Right. And last question I've got here. Doesn't Microsoft, with Office 365 and other similar cloud vendors, keep all this stuff secure for us?
They try. They do. But I will tell you, Office 365, Microsoft works really, really hard. I can tell you the number one in our SOC-as-a-Service amongst all of our customers globally, the number one alert generator over the last, let's just say, year and a half has been Office 365. And I think if you think about it from this perspective, Office 365 is so ubiquitous and there's so many potential ways in. Having multi-layers of not just Microsoft, but also a third-party monitoring is a very important indicator. I'm going to give you a very simple one here, but this is one of the most violated we see. And it has to do with proximity. Can someone who's logged into 365 also be logged in a second time within X number of miles? So maybe you live 20 miles from your office and you're logged in, and then and then you run to the office and you're logged in on another machine. Is that allowable? Maybe it is in your organization. What if it's 40 miles or 50 miles or even a greater distance of miles, or an IP address that never registers before? Those are alerts that should be generated. We see a lot of those, and I can tell you a lot of those tend to lead to bad things. So you need multi-layered even into your biggest enterprise applications like 365.
Cool.
That's all I got on that one.
All right. Do we have any more questions?
No, that's it. That was all the questions, guys.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Tony. That was fantastic. That probably concludes our webinar this morning. Again, thank you everybody for attending. If any of this does resonate and you want to take it and have a follow-up conversation, more information, anything else like that, please reach out. Otherwise, thank you for joining again, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.